Jax's revenge domain.
My name is Harvey Morrison, and I'm sitting across from my boss, Braxton Caldwell, as he slides a piece of paper across his polished desk toward me. It's my annual review, and I've been with this logistics company for 8 years. He's wearing that particular expression he gets when he thinks he's about to deliver devastating news like a cat who's cornered a mouse. "We're cutting your salary in half," he says, leaning back in his leather chair. "Take it or leave it." The number on that paper is so low it would barely cover my mortgage payment. I look up at him and he's actually smirking. 8 years of 60-hour weeks, of keeping his supply chain running smoothly, of being the person every client actually talks to, while he takes credit for my operational expertise. 8 years, and this is what he thinks I'm worth. I understand, I say calmly. When does this take effect? His smirk widens. Immediately. I nod and fold the paper neatly. Perfect timing, I tell him, and something flickers across his face because my reaction isn't what he expected. Before I go deeper into what happened, I'm 48 years old, and I've been running logistics operations since I left the Navy 22 years ago. What I'm about to share with you is going to show you exactly how someone can think they hold all the power and discover they never had any at all. See, what Braxton didn't know as he sat there trying to humiliate me was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd gotten a call from Eleanor Voss. Eleanor runs the most successful logistics firm in our state, and she'd been watching my work for years. Not Braxton's work, mine. Because everyone in this industry knows who actually keeps the freight moving even when someone else's name is on the door. "Harvey," Eleanor had said during our coffee meeting, "I want to offer you something different. Not just a job, a partnership. I'm expanding and I need someone who understands that business is built on relationships and operational excellence, not ego." I hadn't given her an answer that day. I told her I needed time to think. But sitting there watching Braxton destroy 8 years of loyalty with a single piece of paper, Eleanor's offer suddenly felt like the universe aligning perfectly. You have to understand something about Braxton Caldwell. He inherited this company from his father 12 years ago, never worked a day on the warehouse floor, never had to coordinate emergency shipments at 3 a.m. or calm down an angry customer whose delivery got delayed. He's one of those men who thinks showing up and having his name on the building automatically makes him indispensable. What he never realized is that for the past 3 years, I've been running his entire operation. Not officially, of course. Officially, I'm a senior operations manager. But practically, every major logistics decision flows through me first. Every crisis gets resolved by me before it reaches his radar. Every client relationship exists because I built it truck by truck, delivery by delivery. Take our biggest account, Piton Industries. Their logistics coordinator, Janet, thinks she has a direct line to the company owner because that's how I set it up. When she calls with an urgent shipment problem, she asks for me by name. When she's happy with our performance, she sends thank you notes addressed to me personally. Braxton gets copied on emails, sure, but Janet and I are the ones who actually solve problems together. Or consider Morrison Tech, our second largest client. I've been their point person for 4 years. I know their production schedules by heart. I remember when their warehouse manager's son graduated basic training. I send congratulations when their quarterly shipments exceed expectations. Braxton shows up to the annual dinner and makes small talk, but they call me when they need real logistics advice. This pattern repeats across our entire client base, 23 major accounts, and every single relationship runs through me. Not because I'm some master manipulator, but because I actually care about their success. I remember details. I follow up on concerns. I deliver what I promise when I promise it. But here's what really made Braxton vulnerable and what he never saw coming. The suppliers and vendors who keep his business running also work primarily with me. When we need emergency trucking capacity, I call Rodriguez at Premier Transport directly. When we need expedited freight handling, Carlos at Metro Logistics knows my voice. When our warehouse equipment breaks down, Pete from Industrial Services asks for me specifically because he knows I'll explain the problem clearly and treat his technicians with respect. These aren't just business relationships. They're professional connections built over years of consistent, reliable interaction. While Braxton was playing golf and attending networking events where he'd hand out business cards to people who'd forget him within a week, I was building a foundation of genuine operational relationships based on competence and mutual respect. Even his employees gravitate toward me. When someone's confused about a shipping procedure, they come to my office. When there's a conflict between departments, they ask if I can coordinate a solution. When people are thinking about leaving, they confide in me first. Not because I position myself as some alternative authority figure, but because I actually listen and help solve problems instead of just delegating them to someone else. The week after my conversation with Eleanor, I started paying closer attention to exactly how much of Braxton's business depended on me personally. It was staggering. I was copied on probably 90% of critical operational emails. My phone number was the one most clients had saved for urgent issues. My relationships were the ones that generated repeat business and referrals. I realized that Braxton had made a classic mistake. He'd built a business where he was the visible figurehead, but I was the actual operational foundation. Remove me and everything else would have nothing to stand on. So when he slid that salary cut across his desk with such obvious satisfaction, when he looked at me like I was some disposable employee who should be grateful for whatever scraps he threw my way, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Perfect timing, I'd said, and I meant it. I stood up from his office that day and walked directly to my desk. I opened my computer and typed out a brief professional email to Eleanor Voss. I accept your partnership offer. When would you like me to start? Her response came back within 20 minutes. How about Monday? It was Thursday. That afternoon, I submitted my formal resignation to Human Resources. 2 weeks' notice as required by my contract. Professional, courteous, giving him time to transition my responsibilities to someone else. Of course, what Braxton didn't realize was that my responsibilities couldn't actually be transitioned. You can't transfer 8 years of relationship building in a 2-week handover period. When I told him I was leaving, he barely looked up from his computer. Fine, he said. We'll manage without you. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I spent my remaining 2 weeks being the most helpful departing employee in corporate history. I documented every operational process I was managing. I created detailed client profiles with contact information and shipment history. I wrote comprehensive guides for managing vendor relationships. I organized my files meticulously and left clear instructions for whoever would take over my accounts. What I didn't do was transfer the actual relationships themselves because you can't transfer trust. You can't document the fact that Janet calls me when she's frustrated because she knows I'll actually listen and find solutions. You can't write a manual explaining that Morrison Tech trusts my judgment because I've never missed a critical deadline. You can't hand over the respect I've earned from suppliers who know that when I promise something, it happens. On my last day, I cleaned out my desk while Braxton was in a meeting. I took my personal items, my Navy certifications, a few equipment manuals I'd brought from home. I left behind all the company property, all the client files, all the operational records. I wasn't stealing anything. I was just no longer available to be the invisible infrastructure holding everything together. I shook hands with my colleagues, said goodbye to a few of the people I'd worked closely with, and walked out at exactly 500 on Friday afternoon. Monday morning, I started my new position as Eleanor's partner at Voss Logistics. We'd restructured the partnership so I'd have equity and operational authority from day one. My new office had a view of the main warehouse floor equipment that actually worked and a partner who valued competence over ego. By Tuesday, my old phone number was disconnected, forwarded to a generic company voicemail. By Wednesday, things at Braxton's company started getting interesting. Janet called the main office looking for me. The receptionist transferred her to Braxton, who had no idea why she was calling or what shipment she was referring to. Janet hung up confused and called Morrison Tech to ask if they knew what was going on. Morrison called the office Thursday morning with a question about an upcoming delivery schedule. Braxton took the call personally, trying to sound knowledgeable, but it became obvious within 5 minutes that he didn't understand the logistics of his own company's operations. Morrison asked to speak with someone who was actually familiar with their account. There wasn't anyone. By Friday of that first week, 3 more major clients had called with questions or concerns and received similarly unhelpful responses. 2 suppliers called about late payments that I would normally have processed. The maintenance company showed up for a scheduled equipment inspection that Braxton had forgotten was happening. I know all this because people started calling me directly, not to complain about Braxton exactly, but to ask if I knew what was happening. Janet tracked down my new number through a mutual contact and called to congratulate me on my new position. During that conversation, she mentioned how strange it was that my old company suddenly seemed so disorganized. It's like they forgot how to run operations, she said. Nobody there seems to know what's going on anymore. I listened sympathetically, but didn't offer any explanations. What was I supposed to say? That Braxton had spent 8 years taking credit for work he couldn't actually do himself. The second week was when the real problems started. One of their biggest suppliers, the trucking company I'd worked with for years, called about an overdue payment. Braxton apparently got defensive and rude, suggesting they should be more patient about money. Rodriguez, the owner, called me that afternoon. Harvey, I don't know what's happening over there, but that's not how we're used to being treated. If this is how they want to do business going forward, we might need to reconsider our relationship. I maintained my professional boundaries. That sounds like a conversation you should have with them directly, Rodriguez. I'm not involved with their operations anymore. But of course, I also mentioned that my new company was looking for reliable transportation partners, and would he be interested in discussing a potential partnership? This is where people sometimes misunderstand what happened next. I didn't sabotage Braxton's business. I didn't steal his clients or badmouth his company. I simply started building relationships in my new role the same way I'd always built relationships, by being competent, reliable, and genuinely helpful. When Janet mentioned she was frustrated with the lack of coordination from her current logistics provider, I listened. When she asked if my new company might be interested in discussing her account, I said we'd be happy to have that conversation. When Morrison Tech's logistics coordinator called to congratulate me on my new venture and asked about our capabilities, I was honest about what we could offer. Within 3 weeks of leaving Braxton's company, Eleanor and I had secured meetings with 4 of his former clients, not because I recruited them away, but because they sought us out after becoming increasingly frustrated with the service they were receiving. The beautiful thing about building genuine relationships is that people remember how you made them feel. When they're getting poor service from one provider, they naturally think about someone who consistently provided excellent coordination. By the end of my first month at Voss Logistics, we'd signed 3 new major accounts. All of them happened to be companies I'd worked with previously. Companies that had grown frustrated with their current logistics firm's inability to provide the level of service they'd grown accustomed to. The tipping point came when Morrison Tech made the switch. Their coordinator called Braxton personally to explain that they'd be moving their account to a firm that better understood their operational needs. Braxton apparently became belligerent, accusing them of being influenced by a former employee. They called me that afternoon laughing. "Harvey, that man just proved exactly why we made the right decision." He spent 10 minutes yelling about employee loyalty and competitive ethics, but he couldn't answer a single question about our actual logistics requirements. It's like he never understood what we do or why we hired his company in the first place. That's when I realized what was really happening. Braxton hadn't just lost me as an employee. He'd lost the person who translated between his ego and the actual requirements of running a logistics operation. Without me there to bridge that gap, clients were getting unfiltered exposure to his incompetence. The stories started reaching me through industry contacts. How Braxton had forgotten about a major shipment deadline and tried to improvise with outdated routing information. How he'd promised delivery schedules that his remaining staff couldn't possibly meet because they didn't have the vendor relationships necessary to secure emergency transport. How he'd mishandled a crisis situation that I would have resolved with a few phone calls. Each failure made my former clients more appreciative of the service they were now receiving from Eleanor and me. Each conversation with Braxton reminded them why they'd actually valued working with his company, when I was there to make everything run smoothly. 6 weeks after I left, I ran into one of my former colleagues at a truck stop. She looked exhausted. "Harvey, it's chaos over there," she said. "Braxton keeps asking us to handle things you used to do, but none of us know how. Half the suppliers won't return our calls. Clients are constantly asking where you went, and Braxton just keeps saying we need to figure it out because business has to continue." I felt genuinely sorry for her and the other employees who were dealing with the fallout of Braxton's mismanagement. They were good people caught in an impossible situation. "Are you looking for other opportunities?" I asked. "Everyone is," she said. "But Braxton has started making threats about non-compete clauses if anyone else leaves." That's when I knew he was truly panicking. Empty legal threats are what incompetent managers resort to when they realize they've lost control of a situation they never actually understood. Eleanor and I started getting calls from talented people at his company, not because I was recruiting them, but because word had spread about our growing success and positive work environment. When people are trapped in a failing situation, they naturally gravitate toward opportunities that look more stable and rewarding. We hired 3 of Braxton's former employees over the next month. All of them had given proper notice. All of them had been released from any legitimate contractual obligations, and all of them were eager to work somewhere their skills would be valued rather than taken for granted. With each new hire, we gained deeper institutional knowledge about operational processes that were struggling at the old company. Not proprietary information or trade secrets, but general industry knowledge and professional expertise that these individuals had developed over years of experience. The final domino fell when Peyton Industries made their decision to switch firms. Janet called me personally to explain their reasoning. "Harvey, we've been trying to make it work with your old company for 2 months now, but it's like working with strangers. Nobody there understands our shipping requirements or our delivery schedules. Every conversation starts from zero. We're paying premium rates for amateur service." When Eleanor and I signed the Patton account, we became one of the fastest growing logistics firms in the region. In 3 months, we'd gone from a small operation to a significant player in the local market. All because Braxton thought cutting my salary in half would teach me my place. The cascade continued. Rodriguez formally terminated his transportation contract with Braxton's company, citing unprofessional treatment and payment delays. Carlos at Metro Logistics followed suit after Braxton questioned their invoicing procedures in what Carlos described as an insulting and ignorant manner. Pete from Industrial Services stopped answering their calls entirely after Braxton accused his technicians of overcharging for a routine maintenance visit that had been standard procedure for 4 years. Each severed relationship weakened Braxton's operational capacity further. Without reliable suppliers, he couldn't guarantee delivery schedules. Without guaranteed schedules, he couldn't retain clients. Without clients, he couldn't afford to pay suppliers. The downward spiral accelerated. Meanwhile, our business continued growing. We established contracts with Rodriguez, Carlos, and Pete, creating a reliable network of partners who knew our standards and trusted our commitments. The vendors who had walked away from Braxton's company brought years of experience working with our new clients, making transitions smoother and service quality higher. By month 4, we were handling logistics for 12 major accounts, including 7 that had previously worked with Braxton. Our warehouse operations ran efficiently because our staff understood both the client requirements and the supplier capabilities. Our delivery schedules stayed on track because our transportation partners knew we respected their expertise and paid our invoices promptly. The contrast became increasingly obvious to everyone in the industry. One company was growing through competence and relationship building. The other was shrinking through incompetence and relationship destruction. The last time I saw him was at an industry trade show about 6 months after I'd left his company. He looked terrible, stressed, tired, defensive. The booth space he'd rented was smaller than usual, tucked away in a corner instead of his traditional prime location near the main entrance. When he saw me across the exhibit hall, he actually tried to approach me. Eleanor was with me, discussing our expansion plans with a potential client, but I excused myself when I saw Braxton heading our way. "Harvey," he said, his voice carrying that edge of desperation I'd never heard before. "We need to talk." I was polite but firm. "I don't think there's anything for us to discuss." "Braxton, you destroyed my business," he said, loud enough that people at nearby booths started paying attention. His face was flushed, and I could see the stress eating away at him. I looked at him calmly and said the words that I'd been thinking for months. "I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped fixing everything." That was the moment he finally understood what had really happened. I could see it in his face, the recognition, the realization that hit him like a freight truck. For 8 years, he'd been running a company where his most important function was staying out of my way while I made everything work. When he drove me away with that salary cut, he lost the only person who'd been preventing his incompetence from becoming visible to his clients. He didn't lose his business because I sabotaged it. He lost it because he'd never actually been running it. The room around us had gone quiet. Other professionals in our industry were witnessing a conversation that perfectly illustrated why some businesses succeed and others fail. It had nothing to do with revenge or corporate warfare. It had everything to do with understanding that sustainable success comes from genuine competence and authentic relationships, not from titles and ego and the illusion of power. I excused myself politely and rejoined Eleanor's conversation with our potential client. As I walked away, I heard someone behind me say, "That's Harvey Morrison. He's the operations guy behind Voss Logistics' success." That recognition meant more to me than any title Braxton had ever given me or any salary he'd ever paid me. It was acknowledgement from my peers that competence speaks louder than corporate politics. Over the following months, I heard through industry contacts that Braxton had been forced to sell what remained of his company to a larger firm. The brand name disappeared entirely. His father's legacy, built over decades, was gone. The equipment was auctioned off. The warehouse space was leased to a different logistics company. The employees who hadn't already left were absorbed into other operations or laid off entirely. But here's the thing that people don't always understand about this story. I never set out to destroy Braxton or his business. I never planned some elaborate revenge scheme. I simply refused to continue propping up someone who treated me as disposable while depending entirely on my work to maintain his reputation. The most devastating thing you can do to someone who undervalues you isn't what you do to them. It's what happens when you stop doing everything for them. Today, almost 2 years later, Eleanor and I run one of the most successful logistics operations in 3 states. We have 38 employees, warehouse facilities in 2 cities, and a client base that includes some of the largest manufacturers in the region. The State Logistics Association featured us in an article about companies that are reshaping the industry through operational excellence and relationship building. We've been approached by 2 different investment firms about expansion opportunities, but we've chosen to grow at our own pace, maintaining the quality standards and personal relationships that built our success. Just last month, I received a call from a logistics coordinator at a Fortune 500 company asking if we'd be interested in bidding on a major contract. When I asked how they'd heard about us, she said, Everyone in the industry knows that if you want reliable logistics with personal service, you call Harvey Morrison. That phone call represented everything I'd worked 25 years to build a reputation based on competence, reliability, and genuine care for client success. No one could take that away from me with a salary cut or a pink slip. It belonged to me because I'd earned it through consistent performance and authentic relationships. The partnership with Eleanor has exceeded every expectation I had when I accepted her offer that day. We complement each other perfectly. She handles the strategic planning and business development, while I manage operations and client relationships. We make decisions together, share profits equally, and respect each other's expertise. My 2 kids, now in their early 20s, have both worked summer jobs in our warehouse. They've seen firsthand how a business should operate when competence is valued over ego, when relationships matter more than politics, and when success comes from building something substantial rather than tearing others down. That salary cut Braxton gave me 2 years ago was supposed to teach me my place. Instead, it taught me my worth. Here's what I want you to understand if you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my situation. Your value doesn't come from what someone else decides to pay you. It comes from what you can build when you stop accepting less than you deserve. Maybe you're the person who actually keeps things running at your company, while someone else takes the credit. Maybe you're tired of being undervalued despite your contributions. Maybe you're afraid to make a change because you think you need their approval or their validation. You don't. The skills that make you valuable to them will make you valuable to someone else, someone who recognizes competence over politics, someone who builds people up instead of tearing them down. Stop making yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's insecurity. Your worth isn't determined by how other people treat you. It's determined by what you choose to build when you finally decide you deserve better.